Hi, everyone. The program you're going to see based on the book that Doug Campbell and I wrote. And at first I resisted the book idea, and then I got kind of hooked when I kept asking why. Why did this captain go out into a hurricane? So that drove me to pick up the phone and call Doug, and we teamed up, and it really was a fun project to research. And the writing, just kind of almost by luck, we write in a similar style, so we worked on each other's parts. And the book, of course, we go into all sorts of details, but for the slide presentation, what I'm hoping to do is just kind of give you an overview of this whole event, the Bounty tragedy, the Bounty rescue, and answer that question, why. So I organized the slides similar to the book. The book is 3 parts, and Doug really did a lot of work, mostly on this beginning part, really researching the captain and the crew and the ship itself. The ship was a recreation of the original HMS Bounty. And by the way, there were 3 great books I read as a teenager by Norfolk and Hall: Mutiny on the Bounty, Men Against the Sea, and Pitcairn's Island. Has anybody read those? It's a great trilogy if you have a chance. And so everything was exact to detail, except this was a little bit larger ship, again, made for a movie, which was the 1963 version of Mutiny on the Bounty with Marlon Brando. And actually, the movie script called for the ship to be burned at the end, which is what really happened to the Bounty. And Brando said, "You do that, I walk off the set." And so he called their bluff, and they kept the ship, and that's why it was still afloat during Hurricane Sandy. This is the Captain Robin Walbridge, and he's, really essential to the story because he's the one making the big decisions. And by all accounts, he was a great captain in terms of if you wanted to learn about tall ships, he was the guy you wanted to crew for. And, kind of his mission, he had made some money in real estate earlier, so he retired early. And his mission was to keep this tall ship sailing alive, and especially on these square riggers. So he had been the captain on the Bounty for at least 10 years prior to Hurricane Sandy. In the book, we talk about every aspect of his personality, because again, he's the lead character, he's essential to the story. And in some ways, his decision-making before Hurricane Sandy seemed unusual, but then as we dug deeper and interviewed more and more crew from past sailing experiences, we found that sometimes he did like to push the envelope and be out there at the edge of a hurricane where he'd get a great following wind if he was in the right quadrangle. So the story begins with the history of the Bounty and the crew. So it's a slow-building book up to the disaster, but not all the crew wanted to talk to us because it was so emotional. But we got about half the crew to talk, and a key person was Adam Prokash, you see here. And he's very typical of the Bounty crew. Young, a real free spirit, gung-ho. They weren't doing it for the money. They only got paid like $100 a week. And they were taking the Bounty from town to town and even from continent to continent. And they would raise money at the dock. That's how they kept it afloat. People wanted to board it. You could pay and get the tour. It was not certified as a ship to take out paying passengers. So Adam was 29. He was actually one of the people who was severely injured on the Bounty during Hurricane Sandy. A little bit older crew member was Claudine Christian, and her last name Christian, she was a descendant of Fletcher Christian. So this was her first tall ship experience, and she chose the Bounty because of that reason. Of all the people in the book, she was the one who had the strongest I don't know if you call it premonition or intuition, that this trip was not going to go well back in 2012. So they started from New London. Just prior to that, they were up in Boothbay Harbor for at least a month doing repairs on the ship, and they found they needed to replace all the caulking in the hull. You know, it's all wooden. And in the process, they also found some of the main structural timbers. I thought it was rot, but when I was up in Maine, one of the shipwrights showed me a piece, and it was riddled with, they call them woodworms, you know, holes through it. And so, you know, they did their best to patch it up, but they weren't at Boothbay for this complete overhaul. But leaving Boothbay, they were aware that the ship had some issues. Another issue that cropped up as they were going from Boothbay to New London was they noticed the pumps that would suck the water out of the bilge, because it's always, a wooden ship's always leaking a little bit, weren't drawing off the proper amount of water. So they kind of had two warning signs, and it was not a young ship, built in 1960, so 50 years old, 52 years old. So they get to New London, and I'll go back a slide. This is when they begin to hear about this potential storm called Hurricane Sandy. It was down in the Caribbean, and on Thursday, the day they were in New London, this was what the National Weather Service put out, showing its projected path. And unlike my book, Fatal Forecast, where the National Weather Service totally screwed up because they did not tell people their weather buoys were not working and their forecast was all wrong, this time they nailed the storm. The path went almost exactly like it's shown in this projection. So Captain Robin Walbridge, he's got a big decision to make. We're supposed to be down in St. Petersburg in a few days, but we got this hurricane coming up. What do we do? And he decides that because of his experience, he wants to get out to sea, and then he'll make a decision on, based on updated weather information, which way to go to get around the hurricane. And his first mate, whose name is John Svensson, you see in this picture, he didn't think that was such a good idea. And in a private conversation, he tells the captain, you know, I think we ought to stay right here in New London, and or we could either go back to Boston, we could go to New York City, but they're talking about this hurricane being like a superstorm. And the captain said, I understand your concern, and I understand the crew's hearing about this storm. Why don't I give everybody the opportunity to make a decision on what they want to do? So basically he calls them, you know, together on the deck. This would have been Thursday at about 5 p.m. And he says, you know, I know you're hearing about this potential hurricane that's in the Caribbean. I want you to know I've made the decision that we should go, but if anybody doesn't want to go, now's your time. And he added, you know, no hard feelings. You can meet us in St. Petersburg. And not a single person takes him up on his offer to leave the ship. So in the book, Doug and I decided not to insert our personal opinions anywhere in the book, but we could do that at the very end where there's an author's note. So remind me at the end of the program to give you just a personal opinion of why I think every single crew member, there's 16 in total, decided to go, knowing that the hurricane's going to be out there. And so after Robin, you know, calls them together and they all say, we're with you, we want to do this, he says, okay, get the ship ready, we're going to leave in 2 hours. So off they go on Thursday night. Remember, the storm hits up here, I think, on a Monday, but they leave on a Thursday. And so when they're taking off, people I interviewed said, oh, we thought they were going down to maybe New York City, to a safer port, get a little further to the south. But instead they went around Montauk and then headed south-southeast. Again, the captain's thinking is, we're going to get some miles under our belt, heading to our destination then make a decision which way to go. And so the voyage, the first day is uneventful, but they're trying to make good time. So the Bounty did have two propellers, a couple engines and generators, and they had those going as well as sails the first day. Everything went well. That'd be Friday. But by Saturday, things are not going so well. You never want to see a wave this steep. I'm out in the ocean every week, and I've never seen one like this, because if it's this steep, it means it's going to break, it's going to crest. And those are the worst kind. So they're starting to get beat up pretty good on Saturday, and the captain's, he knows the pumps are working continuously to take out water, and they're battening everything down, and he's got to make the decision which way do we go. So this kind of shows their path. As they get down towards Saturday evening, they decide to make a change in course, and they're going to go to the southwest. And in an email back to his kind of, I forget what you call it, but he called it like a home base, he said, we're changing course. We think we can sneak by Sandy if we go to the southwest and then continue on our way to Florida. He says the seas are already very heavy now. So basically, they're taking a risk because the storm is down, above the Caribbean, but say off Florida, and projected to come just like this. So they're going to cross right in front of it, ahead of the storm, and they think they can squeak by not too far off from land. And, the direction they're heading is into the Gulf Stream, and that's always a dangerous place. In the last 3 books I've done, Overboard, A Storm Too Soon, and Rescue of the Bounty, the Gulf Stream is like a minor character because it's flowing to the northeast, and if you have a low pressure system, it's going counterclockwise. So say the storm center is out here, if the wind's coming like this, the wind is going against the current and the waves get steep. So people I've interviewed who have sailed through the Gulf Stream say, yeah, it even has its own little microclimate. Sometimes there'll be thunder and lightning out there. There might be 10-foot seas outside the Gulf Stream, but then when you get in it, they've grown to 20 feet. So it's definitely a place you want to avoid in a storm, and they're going to have to go across the edge of it to get where they want to go. The first injury is to the captain. So this is the great room. It's at the stern of the ship. And as in my research, I see this so often. The injuries usually are a result of a wave hitting the vessel from either a different angle or not in the regular pattern. And the injuries occur from a simple fall. And so a wave hits the ship a little different than the others, and the captain's thrown backwards into that fixed table, and he injures his back. The problem is, now we're into Sunday morning. The problem is he can't do anything about it because by now all hands are needed. Things are happening, like sails are becoming unfurled. Somebody's got to go up in the rigging in the storm, get them back in place. Water's coming in from a number of different areas, both through the caulking that they just replaced, waves coming up on the deck, filtering down through the deck, and they're noticing that even though the pumps are running full speed, the water's climbing in the engine room.
What do the pumps run on?
These were diesel pumps run off the main engine. And so what they do is they decide to, instead of alerting the Coast Guard, try to solve the problem. So they're taking pumps apart. There was an electrician on board. The electricity is surging. They're trying to tackle these problems. And again, I think maybe the captain was in a little bit of denial not to alert the Coast Guard that, hey, we're having trouble. Not a mayday, but just here's our position. because the first mate suggested a couple times we ought to let the Coast Guard know where we are. And the captain said, I think our time's better served fixing the problems. And then finally, Sunday evening, say about 6 p.m., he decides we're going to let the Coast Guard know. So in an email back to his home base, he says, tell the Coast Guard our location, tell them that the pumps cannot keep up with the incoming water, tell them we think we will be fine until morning, and he ends the email saying, you know, the Bounty's doing really good. Like when I read that, I'm like, well, it's not doing so good. Why'd he say that? So when I called the Coast Guard commander who got that email, he said kind of the same thing. He said, we were a little confused by the email. We're worried about communicating with this captain via email because we had no radio communication. And this picture was taken on board the Bounty, but from a different storm. But it gives you an idea of what it would be like when they have to go up on the deck, how dangerous it could be of just slipping through an opening and going overboard. So finally, the Coast Guard decides we better send out an aircraft to make direct radio communication and find out just how bad this situation is. And the big difference in today's Coast Guard versus, you know, the finest hours was from 1952, a rescue off Cape Cod. Back then, the Coast Guard motto was, you have to go out, but you don't have to come back. You know, in other words, if there's an emergency, we go no matter what. Today, they do a whole risk assessment. Can we get our crews back? And even better, the commander of the C-130, Wes Mcintosh, said, they really left it up to me. They said, use your own discretion. We know you're putting your crew in danger going into a hurricane, but if you categorize this as extreme danger, turn back. And I really like that philosophy of leave it up to the people who are on the scene. So Wes Mcintosh, he's a central figure in the book. He takes this C-130 out there, and the thing I'll always remember from that interview is he said, as we're approaching the location of the Bounty, we haven't picked him up on radio yet. He said this wind gust hit us, and he said, you know, threw us up like 300 feet, and then when the gust passed, he said we dropped like a rock 200 feet. And he said the wings, which are fixed, flexed by 5 feet. And he said everybody was bruised and motion sick, and he had on night vision goggles, and he said, I saw the wings do that. And he was like, whoa. But he said shortly after that, we heard the Bounty on the radio, and it was the first mate, John Svensson. And he confirmed, yes, we're taking on more water, something like a foot an hour. And yes, we think we can make it to morning, but is there any ships that can help us? And Wes had to be honest and say negative, nobody else is out in this hurricane. Wes told him, we're going to do figure eights above you, stay with you till morning, but we're going to be way up at 5,000 feet because we're just getting killed at 500 feet. So they actually did make visual contact with the Bounty briefly through their night vision goggles. And for the next part of the story, everything's happening at night. So imagine when you have to go out on deck at night, how dangerous it would be because you can't even see the waves coming. And a big concern is the rigging. If the Bounty were to go over, people are going to be caught in the rigging. And so there's nothing they can do about that. There's just miles and miles of rope. So Wes told me we'd been out there like 2 hours, every maybe 45 minutes. We'd drop down, make visual contact, check with them on the radio. And he said that the first mate said, we've given up with the pumps. We've got the crew up on the deck, and they're all in survival suits. I think we're going to have to abandon ship in the morning when we can do it with daylight. We have 2 big rafts on board. And Wes said, you know, got you. We're going to make sure, if conditions allow, a Jayhawk helicopter comes out when it's safer in the morning. where they have some visual landmarks. And he went back up to 5,000 feet. But he said 20 minutes later, he said, all of a sudden on the radio I heard, abandoning ship, and then click, the radio goes dead. And he's like, oh my God, that's Wes in this picture. And he said, so we went down to 500 feet, and through our night vision goggles, we couldn't believe what we saw. This is the only picture taken at night, and he couldn't believe it. He said the whole deck was awash, and as you can see, the tops of the masts have broken off. So it's already gone all the way over that the masts have hit the water. Now it's come up a little bit, and they have no radio communication. So I said, what do you do? And he goes, we've got rafts on board, so we were preparing to launch the rafts. He said, and I saw at least 30 blinking strobe lights. And I said, 30? I said, there's only 16 passengers, crew members. And he said, I'm telling you, I saw 30. And later I discovered there were extra survival suits, and they must have had water-activated strobes that went off on their own. So this added to the confusion of strobes scattered all around the Bounty. If anybody has questions, just why don't we hold off to the end, and I'll take questions. But hopefully most of your questions will be answered by this overview. So Wes, he prepares to launch the rafts, but one goes out, and just the wind just takes it away, nowhere near the strobes in the water. So he immediately radios Elizabeth City saying, you need to launch a Jayhawk, people in the water, people in the water.
I have a question.
Why don't we hold the questions to the end, okay? We'll hold the questions to the end. So every person on the ship up to this time has been really cool, calm, and collected. They did a great job under extreme duress and no sleep. But when the ship suddenly went over, it just suddenly went over on its side with no warning, they were in their survival suits, and thank God they were on the upper deck, then it was every person for themselves. So some are tossed into the water. Claudine, who was new, she was hanging on and shouted to somebody, what do I do, what do I do? And they said, go aft towards the life raft, crawl towards the stern. Josh Scornavacci told me, he said, I was pushed off the ship by the wave, and he said, then I got tangled in the rigging, and he said it pulled me down 20 feet. And he said the only thing I could think of was how my mother called me before I left and said, don't go, and I said, I'll be fine. He said those were the thoughts as I'm dying. And he said then he suddenly was released, and he didn't know what to do, so he said the masts were coming like this, crashing into the water, then coming up a little bit, then the next wave would have them crash. He said, I didn't know what to do, so I got on a mast. I kind of held on to it. And he said he heard a voice in his ear saying, let go or you're going to die. And he said, I think it was God. It certainly wasn't a crew member in the storm. So he let go, and he saw another blinking strobe light, swam towards it. It was another survivor. So in the night, they're finding each other because of these strobe lights. And again, they had 2 giant rafts on board, and they've gone off the ship like they're supposed to, still in their canisters. And if you tug on the tether, they should pop open. But so many survivors said the worst part was these big old masts and riggings coming down in the water, slamming down, then coming up, then the next wave slamming down right on top of us. So they had to dodge this and try to get away from the ship as fast as they could. In the next half hour, of the 16 people on board, 2 groups formed by finding each other. One was a group of 7 got together, and one was a group of 6. And then the 3 on their own, just out there alone, was Claudine, the captain, and John Svensson. Those 3 never found anyone else. These life raft advertisements always make it look so easy. It never is. I've heard from a lot of people that getting in a life raft in a storm is so hard to do. One even said, I tried it in a pool with a survival suit and I could barely get in it. Well, these survivors, they found the rafts, they got them inflated, and I figured, okay, they're going to be okay. They said we couldn't get in them. I'm like, why? And they said, so much water came into our survival suits, it went down into the legs. So it was like, 50 pounds extra on each legs, and we couldn't lift our bodies into the opening. And so what they did was, it took about an hour, but they would get the smallest person, and as best they could, the people in the water would push that person up to the opening until they could finally haul themselves in. And then that one person would pull in the next and the next. So you had 7 people in one raft and 6 people in another. And the Bounty's still afloat doing this, back and forth into the water. So the rescue was the part that I really dug into and just kind of lived every night by talking to all the different players involved in the rescue part. And it involved a Jayhawk helicopter leaving Elizabeth City and going into a hurricane, which is really dangerous. And so central, and characters in the book are these 4. On the far left is Randy Haba. He's the rescue swimmer. I think they call them survival technicians. They get this crazy name. I just call them rescue swimmer. The aircraft commander, Steve Cerveni. Let's see, Jane Pena, the co-pilot, and then Michael Lufkin, the flight mechanic and hoist operator. And each one has an interesting background, and Steve Cerveni especially, he was, this is the commander, he was in a helicopter crash a year and a half before the Bounty went down. He was flying back on a joint maneuver with the Canadian Coast Guard. He's flying back from British Columbia, and over the Rockies in a snowstorm, a downdraft dropped the helicopter like a stone. And he was told, he survived, but he was told, you'll never fly again, you'll never walk again. And after a year of physical therapy, he was able to walk again, and after a year and a half, he got recertified to fly. And wouldn't you know it, he just gets back on duty. He's the night officer when the call comes in, there's people in the water. So his first big rescue after his own rescue. So off they go. And in retrospect, I think it was a good thing that he was the aircraft commander, had been through that. You'll see why in a minute. They have a hard time finding the raft. If it wasn't for the C-130, and I give the C-130 a lot of credit, the helicopter would have wasted so much time just trying to find rafts. And Wes Mcintosh said, the C-130 commander, he said, don't go to the raft. There's one strobe way off a mile. We think there's somebody in it. And so that's what they did. They went to this one strobe, and Randy got ready. So he'd be on the hook sitting in the doorway. And what they're going to do is lower him. He'll manually unclip from the hook so he's not connected to the aircraft. He'll swim to the survivor, and then Michael Lufkin will lower the rescue basket. They'll put the survivor in that. They'll bring up the survivor, and then they'll put down the clip, and they'll bring the rescue swimmer up. And Randy said, that's how it's supposed to go. He said, we tried 6 times, and I couldn't get to him. He said, finally, on the 7th time, and I said, so why did it take you so many tries? He said, the Gulf Stream. He said, it was just so weird. He said, yeah, these giant waves coming at you like this, you think they're going to push you along. He said, but the current was taking me into the waves. So he said, sometimes it would take me up and over, and that was okay, but other times the wave would be breaking, like at the beach, and I'd go right into the middle of it, and it just pushed me down. And he said, eventually I figured out better timing with the hoist, And I got to that survival suit, and in it was John Svensson, the first mate. And he was injured too, so while I've never met him, I think he's the luckiest guy on the planet, because if the C-130 didn't say, go to this one far away, and instead if they went to the life raft, I think they would have lost him. So Randy gets him into the helicopter, and then they go to the life raft. Now, again, this is all dark, but to give you a sense of what Randy's doing, this is a different period in the rescue in the daylight, but in reality, we're still in the dark. It's like maybe 5 a.m., 6 a.m. Randy will go down like this. Michael Lufkin will hold the cable with one arm, the pendant in the other, and Randy will take one person out at a time. So when he gets to the life raft, he said nobody said a word when he got to the opening. He said they were all kind of in shock. So he just said, who's hurt? And nobody said anything, so he pointed to a guy with gray hair who was just slumped over in the middle, and he goes, you first. And I always thought, and this is a good tip for any of us that might find ourselves in life rafts, I always thought they took the injured person first because, they're going to need medical attention on the helicopter. And Randy said, that's not it at all. He said, we take the person who's going to be the hardest to handle first, because that's when the rescue swimmer, will have the most energy. So we always ask, who's hurt, or if you can't fake being hurt, say you can't swim, and they'll take you first. Because they want the person who's most difficult, because they got to swim away from the raft, put them in the basket, and bring them up. So this raft had 7 people on board, and he brought up 4, and then Steve Cerveni, the commander, goes RTB, return to base, and Randy is back in the helicopter waiting to go down again, and Randy goes, no, there's still 3 down there. Steve says, I don't care, we're at bingo, meaning our fuel, we have just enough to get back. And Randy's like, but there's still 3 people there, and Steve said, doesn't matter, there'll be another helicopter coming out. And in retrospect, it's the right decision, because I've researched helicopters that want to get just one more person, and they go past their bingo, and then if the wind shifts, they don't have the fuel to get back. And they have to do an emergency landing, and you can't land on the ocean in these. The rotors are going to put you upside down. They have techniques for that. They do dunkers in the pool and everything, but if that happens, most of the time, no one survives. So they've got to head out of there, and those poor 3 people left in the raft think they've been abandoned. So that the one injured one they got was the oldest crew member, Doug Font. Remember, he went first, and Doug said, when I got up to the helicopter, I was so happy, and I thought, because he's alive, but he said, no, it was because I saw the first mate in the helicopter, who I thought for sure went down with the ship, because he was on the radio to the bitter end, shouting, abandoning ship, abandoning ship. So Doug said, we flew back, and we were all concerned for our fellow crew members, and the rescue swimmer told us, don't worry, there's another helicopter that's been launched. And so the second team was Dan Todd on the left, that's the rescue swimmer, Jenny Fields, co-pilot, Steve Bond, pilot, and Neil Mulder, the hoist operator. A lot of strange coincidences in this story, like I'm talking to Steve Bond, and I mentioned the other aircraft commander, Steve Cerveni, in the crash. He goes, oh yeah, I was there. I go, you were on the aircraft with him? He goes, no, I'm the one who rescued him. And so I weave that into the story, and like Neil Mulder, on the right, one of the survivors said, he did the weirdest thing in the aircraft, he just ran into the wall. So I said, I heard you ran into the wall. He says, that's right. I said, what happened? He said, I was reaching out, and the cable jerked and dislocated my shoulder. And he said the rescue swimmer was down there, not on the hook. He said the only thing I could think of to do was to pop it back in place, so I ran into the wall. And so these little stories, they just come up, people say them in passing, and I'll go, whoa, 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 back up, That's something that should be in the book. So they get out there, and this is what they see. They have daylight, thank God, this helicopter. They actually think there's people in the rigging of the Bounty, so they zoom down, but it's just debris. There's nobody in the Bounty. And the C-130 says, go to this life raft, it's loaded with people, and they send them to the one with 7. And so Dan said, that's Dan sitting there, he said, I had butterflies because Randy had already told me over the headset how bad it is down there and how the Gulf Stream is, taking you right into the waves. He said, but at least I had the advantage of daylight. So this is Dan going down, and he's going to this raft of the 7. This is him arriving at the raft, a couple survivors sticking their heads out. Dan said, I got my whole body inside, and to calm these people down, I said, hey, I'm Dan, I'm here to give you a ride. And he said people started cheering. And he said then the whole raft got hit by a wave, and he said it tacoed, so one side came over on the other, and he said landed me on a poor crew member. I thought he broke his neck, he said. And I'm thinking, I've already injured somebody and haven't done a rescue yet. And he said, I just kind of put it into high gear. Who's hurt? And they pointed to Adam Prokash, and I just dragged him out of there. And Adam said it was excruciating being stuffed into the basket because he had broken vertebrae in his back, a broken collarbone, and a head injury, all from falling down while on the Bounty. But he said he got me in the basket, and up I went, and Neil Mulder dragged me out of it. And Dan's in the process. He's now rescued, he's rescued 5 out of the 7 in the raft. When this happens, the whole raft flips over and is upside down. And that's Dan in the water. I don't know what he's holding on to. I need to ask him. But he said, I thought they were dead, because how could you find that doorway if everything's collapsed? He said, and it took me forever to get to the life raft. And he said, when I did, on the other side, there were those 2 survivors on the outside holding on to the lifeline. And he just, told them, don't move, we're going to do the rescues from here. And he got one up. And then each time they do a rescue, by the way, they have to reposition the rescue swimmer. Because he'll, say he gets one of the people, he's going to drag it away from the raft, put the person in the basket here. That's going to take time. And what happens is the raft, because it's a big target, drifts a lot faster than the swimmer in the water. So the pilots have to first get the swimmer back on the hook. They may skim them over the water and then find the life raft and repeat the whole process. So when Dan gets up, he's the only rescue swimmer. He was quoted by President Obama during Hurricane Sandy, that line of, hey, I'm Dan. So he's thinking, when Dan gets up, he's thinking, wow, we did it. We got everybody out of this raft, returned to base. And then over the headset he hears, Dan, there's still 3 other people in the other raft that Randy couldn't get ready. And he's like, I was out of gas. But what do you do? And he said those 3, when we went there, he described it like swimming through mud. He said everything was in slow motion. You're taking in a lot of water. In his case, all his equipment stayed on, but I forgot to mention with Randy, the waves ripped off his mask and snorkel, so he did it with no mask and snorkel. Well, he gets all 3 up, and they make one last look. They've got enough fuel to take a last look at the Bounty, and he said it was kind of eerie because the ship had righted itself. So much water was in the hull, it wasn't rocking back and forth that much. He said the masts were out of the water. He said it was like a ghost ship come back to life. So the rescue crew members know, the first helicopter got a group, they've got a group, but there's still 2 missing. And the the Bounty crew also realizes that Claudine is missing and the captain is missing. So a third helicopter comes out, and they did find Claudine, but she had expired. They found her about a half-mile from the Bounty in a survival suit. Rescue swimmer and the flight mech said, we did, CPR the entire flight back, but it was too late. I said, what about the captain? They said, we looked and nowhere to be found. They said the ship was still afloat. And so they gave me the fourth helicopter that comes out in the evening. And I said, what did you find? And they said, the ship was gone, and we never did find the captain. So Robin's body was never found. The last person to see him said he was in a survival suit. He was up on the deck when the ship went over. He was not thrown off. He held on, and then he was kind of crawling towards the stern, and they said that's the last we saw of him.
He was also injured.
He was injured. We don't know if he purposely went down with the ship or what, because his body was never found. And back at Elizabeth City, you could see that problem of the water collecting in the legs. I think the reason why, and I don't have a definitive answer, but I think the reason why is the crew was waiting for morning, thinking the Bounty's going to be okay. We're going to do an orderly evacuation. So I think they had the zippers up to about here, they should go all the way to your nose. They probably still wanted to shout to each other. So that little bit, that 2 inches, they didn't have it up. I think enough water got in to cause this problem. And I thought, what a waste that it didn't have to happen. Claudine's life, the captain's life, and this beautiful ship. But on the other hand, I started to think, what a miracle that 14 out of 16 were saved, and these Coast Guard people on the aircrafts are so young that they can handle this kind of stress. It really is an uplifting story, because in reality, I think all 16 would have vanished if the right set of circumstances and the right set of rescuers weren't on the scene. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.